Hi, and welcome to another episode of Joy Recovery Radio. Glad that you joined us today. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the myths and misunderstandings when it comes to recovery, and specifically recovery ideology or ways of thinking. And we're specifically going to focus in on this idea of powerlessness. And what does that mean and what does that not mean when it comes to recovery? And our basic premise today that we really want to hit home is that we who struggled with sexual integrity issues and compulsive, entitled behavior, we want to emphasize that we have a choice. We had a choice then, we had a choice every time we acted out, and we have a choice today. And it doesn't matter if you are rich or poor, if you come from an abusive background or a very loving, healthy background. It doesn't matter if you have psychological problems or no mental health issues whatsoever. We had a desire for a specific behavior because we thought it would provide some kind of benefit in the moment. And we only stopped the behavior when we reassessed and we gained some kind of new perspective or way of thinking on it. The bottom line is this: our Creator has given us two gifts. These two gifts apply to all humanity. We have the gift of a free will given by God, and we have the gift of mental autonomy. We think our own thoughts. No one thinks them for us. So if we want to do a certain behavior again, we will. If we don't want to do a certain behavior again, we will not. We have the freedom, free will, and mental autonomy to think differently than what we were thinking in the past. Maybe we thought that we needed a behavior in order to deal with difficult or unpleasant emotions. We are now free to believe that it doesn't really help, and that there are other ways to deal with emotional problems. Maybe we believed in the past that we were not loved, we were not valuable, we were not desired, and that acting out would help us feel better in some way. We are free to believe that we are loved, that we are valuable, that we are desired in other ways. And we are free to change our thinking on acting out and no longer believe that it helps with any of those needs. Maybe in the past we thought that our behavior was the only way that we could actually feel fulfilled and happy. We are now free to believe that there are better ways and healthier ways to feel fulfilled, and that this behavior doesn't work for us anymore, and we don't want to go back to it. Maybe we thought that life would be boring, or that life would be more miserable without the behavior. We are now free to challenge that belief and to see life without this behavior as indeed the happier option for us and a less miserable choice. So in this episode, we're going to challenge a few recovery assumptions that are very common out there. The first is this: we are not enslaved to our compulsive behavior. No one ever acted out against their God-given free will. The fact is, every time we acted out, we exercised our free will and we chose to do it. Therefore, we are not, quote, out of control or powerless in that sense, because we do have the power of choice. Our behavior is not some kind of involuntary behavior where we no longer had a free will. And the fact is, if our behavior was so compulsory that we had no choice in the matter, that we had no free will given to us by God, and if that truly is the case, then we are not safe to be in society and we should be incarcerated. But the fact is, we never lost control. We were in total control. We were in control the whole time. We chose these behaviors. So let's unpack a little bit about this myth of loss of control. If you're driving a car, and if the brakes fell and the steering fails, which means you cannot turn and you cannot stop, then you have truly lost control of the vehicle. And you can try everything you want. You will not be able to control that car. It doesn't matter what you may want to do. And whether you see a street to the right that you prefer to go down, or you'd like to stop and park right here on this curb, the car is completely out of your control, and your will doesn't matter. You have no agency, you have no say, you have no vote, you have no voice, you have no influence, you have no power. You're completely out of control. Recovery ideology often claims that we're out of control like that with our behavior. The choice was not possible, just like with the car analogy when the brakes are out or the steering is out. There is absolutely no evidence in behavioral science to back this up. When we feel like truly stopping a behavior, we hit the brakes. When we want to go a different direction with our life, we steer the wheel. Let's look at it a different way. Consider this analogy. Let's imagine that you're at a local park and there's a playground. And there's a young boy at that playground that begins to misbehave. And he is swearing and he is name calling and he's saying cuss words and he's pushing other children and he's kicking other children and he's hitting other children, and his mom keeps telling him to stop and he repeatedly refuses to obey and he won't stop. If we were observing that, we may say that that child is, quote, out of control. But actually, he's in full control. In fact, he's the one who's in control. He's in full control every moment. He is doing exactly what he wants to do. He is not doing what others want him to do. What we really mean in that scenario is not that that child is out of control. What we're really saying is that boy is out of social control. He is behaving contrary to our social standards and our expectations. He's not living the way we think he should live. He isn't doing what others around him expect him to do. Is that not any different with our behavior? It's not that we were out of control. We were in total control. We chose these behaviors each and every time. But we were out of social control. We were not living in a way that was in alignment with the expectations of others or what our society would have us do. So, what are the implications of this? Are we denying that the concept of addiction even exists? That's not what I'm saying. But what I am denying is this. I deny the concept that addiction is an involuntary behavior, that the men who commit these acts don't have free will, and they don't have mental autonomy. They can't think their own thoughts, and they can't make their own decisions, that somehow they're different from other human beings, and that free will and the power of choice doesn't exist for these particular people. I come from the philosophical and theological framework that all behavior is voluntary, that it is freely chosen, that our Creator has endowed us with both of these gifts and they apply to all of us. Mental autonomy, that is, no one can think our thoughts for us, only we can change our thoughts. And free will, we choose our behavior. And if you look at the behavior science, there's been several experiments done over the past 50 years that have shown that there's no such thing as loss of control, that is a myth. There's no study that has ever confirmed the existence of such a weakness when it comes to compulsive behavior. The probability of an addict quitting is constant, whether they have been practicing the behavior for less than a year or for 40 years. The brain changes that supposedly cause addiction are actually a completely normal phenomena. They're part of neuroplasticity. That is, changes in the brain occur with the learning of any repetitive behavior, with any habit that we do over and over and over again. The brain changes to make the future selection of that behavior most efficient. So we become efficient at that particular behavior. But we're not compelled to continue that behavior. We see the same neurological changes in people that repeat other behaviors. For example, piano players, or taxi drivers, or jugglers. A person who practices the piano over and over and over again through the brain changes of neuroplasticity becomes very efficient and adept at repeating those songs, even if it's been a long time since they sat down at a piano. A person who is a taxi driver, through repetition, begins to learn and memorize the various streets and geographies and areas, and they get to the point where they don't even need the map anymore because of neuroplasticity and the changes in their brain. A person who practices juggling a lot, thanks to neuroplasticity, can pick up objects and begin to juggle them with incredible efficiency and effectiveness. But are piano players compelled to play the piano? Are they forced against their will to touch the keys? Is a taxi driver forced against their will to drive any cab that crosses their path? Is a juggler compelled and no longer has free will anytime they see that they could juggle? The brain changes that happen in the brain are not the cause of the habit, they are the result of the habit. The changes serve to make the continuation of the behavior efficient, but they do not rob us of free will. In a very similar way, if I begin to lift weights and my bicep begins to adapt to that repeated motion and tension, and it changes the muscle tissue and it begins to grow and get bigger, this physical change doesn't cause me to go around and punch people against my will. So the thought that brain changes that happen because of repeated behavior now compels or causes the future behavior against the person's will is erroneous. Well, then how do I quit the behavior if I really want to quit? Well, that's the key. How do we quit? We must be thoroughly, 100%, completely convinced in our mind that a life without this behavior is the happiest, most preferred, most attractive, most satisfying option for us. And once we are mentally, completely convinced of that, it doesn't take any special effort or technique to no longer go back to the behavior. What I'm saying is quitting a problematic behavior isn't difficult if you really believe that it's your best option and you really want to quit. If we think honestly and critically about any failed attempt that we had to quit, we would have to admit that in that moment, we didn't want to quit. In that moment, we used our free will to make a choice because we thought in that moment in our mind that there was some benefit. Another common myth is the concept of cravings. How do I resist cravings? What do I do about that? Wanting to act out has been described in recovery circles as, quote, getting these powerful cravings. And it's believed that cravings are some kind of mystical force that we have to fight and resist and prevent by some complicated strategy or some coping technique. The truth is that craving is an activity that we're choosing to do. We actively engage in craving by thinking in some way, gosh, it would be really nice to act out right now. It would feel really good to lust or objectify right now. So to crave is to actively think that a behavior is the preferable option in that moment. Then you start having cravings. It doesn't begin with a physical craving. It begins with a mental thought. When we change our perception of lust or acting out, and we see that no longer engaging in it is indeed the preferred option, then craving will no longer be a part of your experience. Because we will not be thinking, I need to act out. I need to lust. Wouldn't that be nice right now? But until we've changed our way of thinking and our perception, we may very well find ourselves revisiting that thought that we want or need to do this behavior right now. And if you are thinking that, craving will surface. All you need to know right now with this episode and the point of what we're talking about is that there is no loss of control. There is no lack of free will ever in our experience, nor is there any kind of powerful craving that's going to force you to do something that you don't really want to do. When we think we need to act out, you are free to challenge that thought, and you are free to replace it with a different thought. And you are free to ask yourself, is this really what I want? Is this really what I need right now? So what is a craving? A craving is simply having a momentary, favorable thought about acting out. And we have the total freedom to think differently. Craving is not something that happens to us against our will. Craving is something that we are actively feeding and doing with our thoughts. Another common thought is, well, isn't addiction genetic? Wasn't I born this way? And some people are convinced that addiction, quote, runs in the family, that there's some kind of genetic abnormality that forces them against their will to be compulsive, that it's a genetic issue and you can't blame me. And they point to other family members who also had some kind of compulsive behavior and see, here's proof that I'm genetically fated to repeat history, that I really don't have a free will. I'm just a product of my genes. This is a case where we will actually find exactly what we're looking for. Because according to the most recent data, roughly 1 in 3 Americans fit the diagnostic criteria for an addiction at some point in their lives. That means that the odds of you having some kind of relative in your family who has struggled with some kind of compulsive behavior are pretty much absolute. Given the stats, the odds are there is some kind of addiction that runs in your family. It runs in everyone's family. But there has never been the identification or the verification of a single addiction gene that can be explained as the cause of addictive behavior. And even if genes are somehow involved and they're contributing, the majority of people who have addictive behavior stop anyways, despite their genes. So looking for the addiction gene actually gets in the way of you making changes to the way you think, because you're looking for causes that aren't there. And you end up using those causes as excuses to do what you really want to do, and that is to go act out again. Another popular cause of addiction, and I use air quotes for that, is that, well, I had an emotionally troubled childhood, and that's what causes me to act out. Well, let's face it, childhood and adolescence are very stressful periods of life for everyone. There's this roller coaster of emotions for every child and adolescent, whether you're an addict or not. So the chance of finding some kind of experience in our past that was either traumatic with a big T or a little t is pretty much absolute for all of us. But emotionally troubled childhoods aren't exclusive to addicts. So it doesn't make sense to consider that to be causal. Problematic compulsive behavior is an activity that we chose because of our personal view, and we felt like the behavior might provide an emotional benefit. So the way to stop a behavior that we're constantly regretting is to change our perspective on whether it's the best option for us. And is this really helping us with our problem emotions? What we're talking about here is we need to stop looking for causes to addiction because they don't exist. What we need to look at and where we can find more value is what were the reasons that I chose this? Because it was a choice, and it's still a choice. It's always been a choice. It always will be a choice. When we claim that one thing causes another, that should be observable and verifiable 100% of the time in every case without any exception. If I told you that if you took a match and if you lit it and you put it inside a tank of gasoline in a car, that it would cause an explosion. You could test this claim. You could do it 100 times, and it will always result in an explosion 100 times. There isn't always a one-to-one relationship. Now, I don't recommend that you go out and test this theory, but you get my point. If there's causality, it's 100%. It always causes it. Problem childhood doesn't cause addiction. Otherwise, everyone who had a problem childhood would have an addiction. Another common misconception is that poverty causes addictive behavior. But if you look at the literature, for every 100 people who grew up in poverty, about 20 of them would fit the diagnostic criteria for an addict. So what happened to the other 80? If this is causal, how did they escape it? And in fact, if you go to an expensive treatment center for addictions, you're going to find people who grew up both in poverty and in wealth and in luxury. So for those people who grew up with wealth, what was the cause for them? And for the 80% of people who don't turn to addiction growing up in poverty, how is this really a cause? Same thing has been said for trauma. That trauma is a cause for addiction. However, when you look at the literature on trauma, only about 15% of trauma victims end up having addictive compulsive behavior in their adulthood. So are the other 85% somehow superheroes? Do they find some kind of magical power or solution to avoid this law, this causality, that trauma always causes addiction? Our emphasis today is that we need to quit focusing on causes, because there are none. We need to focus on reasons. We chose this behavior, and it is worthwhile to know, why did I choose this behavior? And let me tell you, your partner especially wants to know why you chose this behavior. And there's probably a long list of reasons why you chose it, most of which were false beliefs that hopefully you have challenged and replaced so that you never go back to this behavior again. But there were no causes. There were only reasons. There were reasons that we chose this. To use the word cause implies that there's a lack of choice. It brings humans down to being some kind of unthinking object or animal or robot that's just programmed, and they do what they're programmed to do, and there's no free will. It reduces people to helpless victims. We're either a victim of our circumstances or we're a victim of our genes, and there's no hope. And if we think there are causes to our behavior, then we hope that they'll go away, or that somehow the environment will line up just perfectly so that there's no more causes to us acting out. What we're left with is to try and create the perfect environment around us, or to find the right medication, or to find the right therapy or the right group that will change us, instead of focusing on renewing our mind and changing our perception, which was the main reason we chose to do this in the first place. Stop thinking about causes. Focus on reasons. Causes are outside of your control, so what's the point anyway? But reasons are well within your control. Reasons are thoughts in our mind, and they're within our direct control. In fact, you're the only one who can do something about your thoughts. You can rethink, you can reevaluate, you can look at all your options, you can make different choices today and tomorrow, because God gave us a free will in the past, He gives us a free will today, and He'll give us a free will in the future. And there's nothing outside of yourself that can change you. No one else can do this for you. These are your thoughts, and the battle happens in your mind. There's no person, there's no pill, there's no program, there's no intensive, there's no inpatient treatment, there's nothing that can cause a human being to change the way they think. It's up to you, and it's up to you alone. What we do have in recovery circles is what's called learned connections. What is a learned connection? Well, consider some of these phrases. Quote, well, it was my anxiety that caused me to act out. Or, I was abused as a child, and the trauma causes me to act out. I don't have a choice. I have to numb myself when I feel difficult emotions. Yeah, I went on a binge after my dad died. The grief just made me too weak, and it triggered a relapse, and I couldn't control it. Or, I have a mental disorder, and that causes my addiction. Addiction runs in my family. I'm a third-generation addict. Really didn't have a choice. I have some baggage that I haven't dealt with yet, and that's why I keep relapsing over and over again. Or, here's a very popular one. I acted out because I'm an addict. That's what addicts do. And if you're not an addict, you just wouldn't understand. You've probably heard some of these quotes, haven't you? Perhaps you've even said some of them. Perhaps you still even believe some of them. I certainly did at one time. These are learned connections. You learned to connect A with B. You learned causality. That doesn't make it true. A learned connection is any belief that causally connects one life problem to acting out. And we hear these learned connections all the time, not just in recovery circles. We hear them in news, we hear them in books, we hear them in movies, we hear them in casual conversations. But they are especially prominent in the recovery subculture, where the belief is that something outside of ourselves can cause us to act out. Some people believe that all they really need to find in order to be sober is happiness. That the key somehow to finding and remaining sober is finding and keeping happiness. Happiness is what's necessary for sustained sobriety. That one is dependent upon the other. As long as I'm happy and my environment's perfect, I'll be sober. But if there's any kind of unhappiness, if there's any kind of disruption to my perfect environment, then I'm going to act out against my will, and there's nothing I can do about it. There are many of us who stay sober despite having incredibly difficult challenges and emotional disturbances. I have been through tremendous heartache during recovery, but not once did it cause me to act out. However, if I wanted to act out, I could easily use my heartache or my emotional problem as an excuse to justify what I did, when really I did it because deep down inside, I wanted to and I chose to. Now I no longer see acting out as a solution to any of my problems in life, but I used to. And like many people, when I look at my childhood, I have many episodes of trauma and abuse and problems in my past. I still, to this day, suffer with bouts of shame and bouts of depression I have anxiety issues. I cannot honestly say that the trauma, the abuse, the heartache, the problems in my life ever caused me one time to act out. And you know what? In the future, life is going to continue to be challenging. Life is going to continue to have heartache and problems and difficult times for all of us. That doesn't mean that it's going to cause us to act out against our will. Our sobriety is not automatically dependent on whether we're happy internally or our environment around us is perfect externally. I've seen happy and successful people relapse, and I've seen miserable people stay sober. If stress causes us to act out, then none of us have any hope. We're all doomed every time we feel stress. Not just some of the time, but every time, if it's truly a cause. Here's a working definition of addiction. Addiction is a self-created habit. We created it, and it became a habit. We have two choices. We can see our thoughts and our behaviors as being caused by something external and outside of us, and we have an external locus of control. Or we can see that our thoughts and our behaviors are caused by us. They are freely chosen, and we have an internal locus of control. We often hear that stressful circumstances causes us to act out, and therefore a therapist or a sponsor or a recovery group causes us not to act. However, our personal reasons for choosing the behavior is often ignored. And this thinking renders us as perpetual victims of all the circumstances in our life. We're like a leaf blowing in the wind, unable to choose where it lands or what we're going to do next. But ask yourself, and be honest, are any of your acting out behaviors truly involuntary? Either we're free to make choices, or there's a whole web of causes at work in our life that render us hopeless. There is no amount of addressing causes that will help you, because nothing causes acting out. There are no causes. There are no causal connections. There are only learned connections. And all these things that we call causes are simply contributions to the way we think, held together by nothing more than a belief within our mind. And here's the good news. They can be unlearned. Now that we're aware of the facts, we no longer have to believe that we're doomed to a lifetime of addiction against our will. We can be free from the panic that we may feel when we suffer emotional discomfort, because it no longer needs to be taken as a sign that we're going to be forced to act out against our will. The same is true for our betrayed partners. They don't have to live in fear, somehow thinking that if they don't create the perfect environment around us, that that's somehow going to trigger us and cause us to go act out against our will because we don't have a free will. Let's be rigorously honest with each other. We acted out when we faced a problem, not because the problem caused us to act out, but because we believed that acting out would somehow help with the problem. Are you willing to question that belief? Are you willing to challenge the belief that acting out is a helpful response in any way to any problem in life? You will find that acting out has not ever contributed a solution to any of your problems. Acting out didn't erase memories of the trauma from your past. Acting out doesn't relieve negative emotions like stress or anxiety or depression or shame. It just makes it worse. Acting out didn't resolve any losses that you suffered. Acting out never mended a broken relationship for you. Acting out never brought a loved one back from the dead. Acting out doesn't help you get your lost job back. Acting out doesn't replace any personal failures with a new success. Acting out doesn't give us back time that we regret wasting. Acting out was not a solution to any of these problems. In fact, it was part of the problem. It made it worse. If we discover this truth for ourselves, we will have no reason to act out in response to any problem, and we'll have no desire to act out in response to any of these problems. If you're searching for causes, it's distracting you from identifying the reasons that you chose to act out, the reasons we hold in our mind. That is the real work of recovery. Stop chasing causes. They don't exist. We don't need to be problem-free in life in order to be sober. We can be free from these learned connections that have kept us trapped. You're in the driver's seat. The brakes work fine. The steering wheel works fine. You can park. You can turn anytime you want. You have more agency than you think you do. Now's the time to move on. Disconnect from these causes. Disconnect from thinking that the trauma and the stress and the abuse and the depression and your genes caused you to do what you did. That's not helpful at all. Because addiction is simply this. It's a personal preference based on personal beliefs that developed into a habit. The only limit to how quickly and easily we can change these beliefs is how open-minded we're willing to be right now. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.